Almost the entire class today was concerned with solving this system of equations. 2x plus 3y equals -2, 4x minus 5y equals 18. To solve this system of equations, we have to find a value of x and a value of y that make the equation true. Now I can tell you right away that if x is 2 and y is -2, then we would have 2 times 2, 3 times -2, which would be 4 minus 6, which is -2. And if x is 2, again, y is -2, 4x would be 8, 5y would be 10, -5y would be 10, because -5 times -2 would be, well, you figure it out, it's 10. And 8 and 10 add up to 18. That's the solution. That's a solution to this equation. Now, how do we find that solution? Trial and error might possibly work, but it's going to be hopeless for a slightly more complicated equation, or an equation with numbers that don't work out so nicely. Now, in order to solve this equation, the first thing I did was I said, okay, you can, what I want you to do is multiply the first equation by -2. I just told people to do that. Multiply the first equation by -2. Now, without looking further, you ought to do that if you weren't in class, even if you were. Okay, well, if we multiply both sides of the equation, when I say multiply the equation, I mean multiply the whole blame thing, multiply the entire equation by -2. We put a -2 in front of both sides of the equation, and we've done it. And of course, then we can simplify that by expanding using the distributive law. We get -4x minus 6y equals 4. If we pair that up with the second equation, so the first equation, if you like, becomes this. The second equation stays as it was. And we now see that if we line these equations up, if we add these equations, if we add the left side of this equation to the left side of this one, the right side of this one to the right side, well, the right side is going to add up to 22. The left side, well, the -4x and the positive 4x are going to give us 0. -6y and -5y is going to give us -11y. And we have the equation -11y equals 22, which is easily solved. We simply divide both sides by -11. We get y equals -2. Now we're going to do something with that in a minute, but let me stop and observe that at this point, x has been eliminated. Our goal was, at the beginning, and will be when we solve these kinds of equations, to eliminate either x or y from the equations by matching up the coefficients of x. The only way you're going to match up the coefficient, of course we could also, and we will in a minute, match up the coefficients of y. The only way you're going to match up the coefficients is, well, if they're already matched up, then it's great. If they're not already matched up, you're going to have to multiply at least one of the equations by some number, and maybe both. In this case, multiplying the first equation by -2 was sufficient. Okay, so now we've determined that y equals -2. Now, if you remember what I said earlier, if x is 2 and y is -2, then that is a solution to the system. So we've got the y equals -2. If we don't already know that x equals 2, then we're going to have to take that y equals -2 and substitute it back into one of these two equations. I just chose the first equation because it was easier to draw the arrow from the y equals -2 up to the y here. And then I draw another arrow down here, indicating that the -2 has been substituted for the y to give us this. And this equation is easily solved. I'm not going to read the steps to you. It's a very straightforward equation. Everybody can solve it. And when we solve it, we get x equals 2. And I'm not sure that the camera gets that. There's the x equals 2. Okay? I'm going to have to move this camera back just a little more. Okay, now we check our solution. To check the solution, we substitute x equals 2 and y equals -2, not into the first equation, because we substituted the y equals -2 into this equation. So if we made a mistake between here and here, it isn't going to necessarily show up. Or if we had a mistake, between here and here, if the y equals -2 wasn't right, we still would have gotten a solution for x. and it would still satisfy the first equation. What we do is we substitute the negative 2 and the 2 into the second equation, because we haven't really used that since the very first steps. So we substitute back into the second equation, substituting 2 for the x and negative 2 for the y. We get this equation, and we multiply it out, and we get 18. So that's very straightforward. Now, there's another way of solving this system, and that's by the method of what we call elimination. And we'll get to that in the next clip.